Let us open in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the stable and peaceful government we have in this land. We thank you that the election, whenever it is called, will be decided by voting and not with violence. And we pray, Heavenly Father, that our discussions tonight will be respectful and generous, that we will listen well, and that we will hear people with open minds and open hearts. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you would bless this time to us, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to hand over to Mike Adams from Goulburn Presbyterian Church. Mike.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you to Paul and St Nick's for hosting tonight's event. You may be wondering, what are we doing in the church to have a political debate like this? Well, as pastors and as leaders of churches, we try to remain politically neutral. We serve people of all sorts of political persuasions in our church families. So we sit in the middle. We don't actively try and get you to vote for either party or any party in particular. So our hope tonight is that we can help you leave here more informed about the positions that the two parties represented here take on various issues that will affect us in our electorate, and therefore able to vote whenever this election is finally called for, having considered the options before us and come to a conclusion based on evidence and informed opinions. So how will this evening work? Well, at the moment there are 3 declared candidates in the Eden Monaro electorate, of which we have 2 here tonight. Kristy McBain from Labour and Joe van der Plaat from Liberal. We want to thank you both for making the time to come and speak with us tonight. To begin with, we're going to give each candidate 10 minutes, roughly. We're not going to be hot on time. Roughly 10 minutes to tell you about themselves, what they stand for, and why you should consider voting for them. After we've heard from both candidates, we'll have a brief sort of 2-minute break just to get up, stretch your legs, and we're going to rearrange the furniture up here. Because the bulk of our time tonight is going to be a moderated Q&A time. We should get about an hour or so for that. The way that this will work is we're not going to be taking questions directly from the floor. We find that it's easier to have the questions submitted through the app that I'm going to tell you all about in a moment, so that we can have a conversation that goes from one topic to another without kind of going backwards and forwards between topics. It allows us to go a bit deeper into certain issues. What you'll see on the screen, no, you can see me on the screen. Can we have the other thing on the screen? The QR code? I didn't know I was up there too. Hopefully most of the evening there's going to be a QR code up there. If you grab your phones, scan that QR code, or if you can't scan it, if you're too far back and can't scan it, just open it and go to slido.com. And once you're in Slido, there is a code on the screen. There's some digits there, 24119-105. Type that code in and that will take you to the page for our meeting. At any time during proceedings, you can write a question for the candidates. You'll see the questions that have been submitted previously, and you can like them, and that will show us how popular those questions are. If you're not able to bring up the technology, Paul, who opened this evening, is available. Wave your hand in the air, and he has paper and pen, and at any time he will come running to you as fast as he can, and you can write your question on the paper, and he will put it into the app. He's slowing down. He turns, how old tomorrow? 50? It's his birthday tomorrow, so he's going to enjoy one last final run in his 5th decade of life. Thought I'd get that in for you, Paul. We're going to use this, sorry, I've covered that bit. I'm going to then put your questions to the candidates during the Q&A in the form of a conversation. The aim of tonight is to have a positive tone, give each candidate a fair opportunity to present their ideas. That's enough from me. You're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from these 2 lovely ladies who are with us today. So I'm going to introduce our first candidate who's going to speak to us. Our first candidate is Kristy McBain from the Labour Party. Kristy is the current sitting member for Eden Monaro, the electorate that we here in Goulburn are new to, but some of you have been a part of for a while. She's currently the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and the Territories. Welcome, Kristy. The floor is all yours.
Well, hello. It's really lovely to be with you tonight here in Goulburn. I'm Kristy McBain, the current member for Eden Monaro, and I have had the honour and privilege of representing communities across the electorate of Eden Monaro now for close to 5 years. My journey into politics hasn't been a traditional one by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll give you a bit of an update on who I am and what I stand for. Neither of my parents finished high school. My mum went to work in retail before she got to live out her dream in running her own business and finished her career in aged care. While my dad was a plumber and gas fitter by trade, worked in coal mines before joining my mum in the small business and finishing his career at Bega Cheese. I'm the first in my family to attend university, which was something new and exciting for our family because I am the odd one out. Everyone else in the family has been to TAFE, whether that was my mum in her 50s retraining as a leisure and lifestyle coordinator in aged care, my dad obviously through plumbing and gas fitting, my brother as a chef and my sister as a bookkeeper. So when we talk about free TAFE in the Labor Party, I know all too well the difference that it can make in a family's lives because my family has absolutely taken the best of vocational education and training and turned that into a career. I had never intended to get involved in politics. It had not been my bag of dice whatsoever. I was actually on maternity leave from my job as a lawyer in a small town called Bega, and there'd been a decision made about a local playground. At the time, I had a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old, and I thought, how have the council made this decision? Because it wasn't obvious to me what they were doing, and I thought that the 8 men and the 1 woman on council probably didn't represent my demographic as best as it could. So we had been raised with a motto, you put up or you shut up about it. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a crack at this. So we had just started our own plumbing business. My husband's also a plumber and gas fitter. We just opened our own small business and I thought, I'll have a go at this. I got elected in 2012 to the local council and I was still the youngest on council by quite some way. But what it did is give a demographic of people in my community a voice within that council structure. I was lucky enough to be elected 4 years later in 2016 as our local mayor, and unfortunately at that time we had 9 declared natural disasters in our community. One was an East Coast low where we had 17-metre waves take out coastal infrastructure. We had a number of floods and heavy rain events and 3 bushfires, obviously culminating in the Black Summer bushfires where in my community we lost 465 homes, 1,000 sheds and outbuildings, and unfortunately 4 members of our community. The only thing that put out our bushfires was a flood. So we literally lurched from one disaster to the next, and then COVID came along. It was at that time I was really frustrated with state and federal governments because I had walked the halls in Macquarie Street and in Canberra talking to ministers and politicians about how I thought disaster response and recovery could be streamlined and work better for communities. And the then opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, flew in and said, there is going to be a by-election here and I want you to run. I thought long and hard about it for about 2 weeks and I thought there is so much to do in my local community that I'm not sure that I should. But then I heard my mum's voice in the back of my head, and the whole reason I ran for council in the first place was to make sure that there was a new voice in the mix. And I thought, you know what, I can have a go at this. There does need to be new voices in Parliament and people that are prepared to work with communities across the aisle and across the 3 levels of government to get things done in our communities. And that's very much been my tact over the last 5 years, is to work with people to get things done in our local communities. I am somebody that doesn't like to take no for an answer, so I will go and walk the halls of power and speak to whoever I need to try and get outcomes for my local community. Whether that was when I was in opposition and working with members of the coalition government, when I was in opposition working with members of the coalition state government, to now working with members across the community to make sure we get things done. What that means for Goulburn is you've got a committed advocate who will work with whomever to get the community's priorities actioned. There has long been talk about a Yass water treatment plant from all sides of government. I've now delivered the funding for that, over $17 million worth of funding, because it is not good enough for communities to continue to talk about an issue, they actually want it actioned. The Marulan sewage treatment plant, a long talked about issue which will develop more homes here and allow homes in Marulan to connect to a sewage treatment plant, $27 million. As a former mayor, I know the struggles on regional and rural councils, particularly with roads funding, which is why I fought really hard to make sure we double a roads fund called Roads to Recovery to $1 billion a year. It's an automatic allocation to every council across the country. It doesn't mean you apply for grants, it's something that comes out automatically every single financial year. What that means here in Goulburn is an extra $4 million over the next funding period, bringing Roads to Recovery in Goulburn-Mulwaree to $9.2 million. I'm someone that is committed to equity and fairness, someone that is prepared to have the tough conversations and to work with people to get outcomes. I am someone that is committed to listening to the local community, someone that has a track record of doing that and turning that listening into action. I'm really pleased to be here today to continue to listen to the community and understand what drives you and the desires and the priorities that you have for your local community. And I'm prepared to work with you to make sure we turn those things into actions. I am someone who is really dedicated to a couple of the key principles and priorities of the current government. Free TAFE, which is turning people's aspirations into education and into careers. Wiping HECS fees for doctors and nurse practitioners to come and work in rural, regional and remote communities. Making sure that we are dealing with the big issues in Medicare, including tripling the bulk billing incentive, because it's incredibly important that we have access to healthcare for all, including the announcement just made a little while ago about making medicines cheaper across our community. The last election, we took medicines from $42.50 down to $31.70, and we'll continue to reduce the cost of medicines to $25 if we're re-elected in the next few weeks. That's an important principle because in this country we firmly believe that healthcare shouldn't rely on your bank balance and shouldn't rely on where you live. And I think it's important that we all continue to strive towards a healthcare system that is fair and accessible to all. Cost of living has been a big issue and one we have heavily focused on, whether that is through a range of initiatives in the healthcare system, whether that's through the cheaper childcare measures, which will further take the impact off people's hip pocket, whether that is strengthening that childcare system ongoing through 3 days of guaranteed learning. But it's really important, I think, that families have choice in this, which is why we're also committed to increasing paid parental leave out to 26 weeks, so that families have that choice to be at home as long as possible with families and young children. It is important, I think, that we continue to work on those cost of living measures. Energy bill relief is critical to that. We want to make sure that we are taking the pressure off inflation through those committed issues that we are dealing with, because it takes the pressure off people's hip pocket. There won't be huge cash splashes. What we're looking at doing is responsible budget management, and you've seen that over the last couple of years, with $170 billion taken off the national debt, $70 billion less in repayments for Australian taxpayers at a time where we've also delivered tax cuts to every working Australian, as well as those other cost of living reliefs that I've spoken about. There is more to do though. There is always going to be more to do because government is never perfect. We're always dealing with the next issue that is thrown at us, whether that's through changes in technology, through changes in the environment, through changes in workplaces. We need to make sure that we're striving to be the best country we can be and putting ourselves out there as what we want to be in the world. We've been really clear about a future made in Australia, and I think that's become more important now than ever when we see what's happening across other parts of the world. The last budget we said we would put $22 billion towards a future made in Australia, one where we can turn our resources into products that Australians want to buy, into products that the rest of the world wants to buy, and we are heavily committed to that. As Australians, we're great innovators, we're great inventors. We invented the cochlear ear implant, and unfortunately it was commercialised overseas. We invented solar panels, and it was commercialised overseas. We invented the rapid antigen tests, and it was commercialised overseas. So the stake in the ground we need to put right now, more than any other time in history, is that we need to be a country that makes things here and have real dollars committed towards that. A future made in Australia is not just a nice slogan, it's something that we should be striving for. When we look at OECD countries, we are the second last for self-sustainability. And that was evident during the COVID period where we were at the end of the supply chain. We have got to change that trajectory and we have to make more things in this country. That is what we're committed to as a government, and it's what every Australian should be committed to. Buying locally, sourcing jobs locally, and making sure we're backing local innovation. We are doing that and we will continue to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristy. Our second candidate is Jo van der Plaat, who's standing for the Liberal Party. Jo's a lawyer and was previously the president of the Law Society of New South Wales. So I'd like to welcome Jo. The floor is all yours. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to thank the combined church community here in Goulburn for coordinating tonight's event. The sense of peace that I have here tonight is much appreciated and needed in the hustle and bustle of campaigning, which I've been doing for over 12 months now. So I do stand before you all here tonight to seek your support in this election, because I stand up for, and I will continue to stand up and show up for each of you and each and every one of you every day if I'm elected. I will fight for what you ask me to fight for, because you are the experts in what goes on in your local communities. I was pre-selected in November 2023, and since at that time I've travelled over 100,000 kilometres around this very, very big electorate to listen, to work and to commit to delivering practical policy that provides an equity of resourcing and delivers real outcomes to our rural and regional communities. I've held health roundtables, small business forums, mobile offices, street stalls and one-on-one meetings. I visited men's sheds, CWAs, view clubs, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, senior sits, veterans, RFS and sporting clubs. And there's plenty more to visit. I met with important stakeholders including HIA, MBA, grain growers, Minerals Council, South East Forestry and local councils, and also important partners in our environmental space, Malone Institute, a local organisation, Longwater Ag, regen farmers, dairy farmers, oyster farmers, cattle and sheep farmers, health professionals, mental health professionals, doctors, childcare services, disability support agencies, aged care facilities, builders, hospo, and importantly, small business. Like me, our party has listened to ordinary Australians and acted with purpose to learn from past mistakes, to look and try and look beyond a 3-year political cycle and plan for what I see is my children and your children's future. And I am looking forward to answering your questions tonight on policy. But first, a little bit about me. I would describe myself as a typical middle Australian. I've lived in Cooma since 1985, and I'm married to a local builder, Anthony. We have a son, Zach, who's 22, and a daughter, Cooper, who's 17, doing her HSC this year. Please pray for me. My first degree after high school was nursing. I never wanted to be a nurse, but I always wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I might do a little bit of medical negligence work. It turns out there isn't too much medical negligence work going on in Cooma. I've been the partner of a law firm in Cooma and practice mostly in industrial relations, property and local government. After 20 years, I retired from that firm to become the president of the New South Wales Law Society. And for the last 10 years, I've chaired various committees, and I will mention one as chair of the Law Council of Australia's Rural, Regional and Remote Lawyers Committee. It is there that I got to develop my deep policy expertise around creating solutions to the recruitment and retention of lawyers in the bush and the succession planning for those that wanted to retire. As a candidate, that interest has now extended to other professions and industries that face similar challenges, particularly as we know in the health space. Giving a voice to those who are voiceless, fighting relentlessly for the underdog and creating solutions to people's legal problems are what I do every day for a living, and as well as my efforts in the community. They're the skills that I bring to my role as a candidate and if elected to Parliament. Giving back to community is really important to me. That is how I was brought up, is that you give back. I'm an active member of my local fire brigade, and I've previously been a director for our local aged care facilities, childcare centres and social justice organisations. I was raised in a family which was impacted by alcoholism and domestic violence, and my mum was the backbone for myself, my brother and my sister. I was very close to my grandparents. In fact, we lived with them for a while during my childhood. My grandfather was a mechanic with his workshop out the back, and my nan ran the books. My mother worked in the disability sector for over 30 years and later became a wool classer. I was taught the value of hard work, kindness, respect and responsibility. We never had very much, but what we had we appreciated and we enjoyed, and we never lived beyond our means. Pop held the traditional view about discussing matters that were considered private. No sex, no politics and no religion. In 2017, just before he passed away, he gifted me a small orange booklet. It was the Liberal Party's statement of beliefs, and it was printed just after my mother was born in 1954. Now, I didn't know until then that he was a Liberal voter. Our Liberal Party statement of beliefs are just as relevant today as they were 70 years ago. They speak of Australia's courage and capacity, future and national sovereignty. They empower individuals as a free person with initiative, individuality and acceptance of responsibility. Rights connotes duties, and fundamentally, we do believe in liberty, an individual and social liberty based upon the notion of social justice. I believe that improved living standards depend on high productivity and efficient service, and that national financial and economic power and policy are not there to be designed to control our lives. In fact, governments should create a climate in which we are enabled to work and work out our own way forward. And I believe in great social human freedoms: the right to worship, to think, to speak, to choose, to be ambitious, to be independent, and to be industrious, to acquire skills, and for that you seek and earn rewards. We believe, and I believe, in social justice, in encouraging the strong and protecting the weak, in widening opportunities for education, and in the preservation of the family and good homes owned by those who live in them. And critically, I believe in religious and racial tolerance amongst all Australians. People ask me often why I became a Liberal. It is for all of those reasons that I've just outlined. I don't want to be told how to run my business. I don't want government overreach. I want to be responsible for my own choices and their reward or consequence, and that's how we've brought up our kids. I want to be free to parent as I decide. I want to be able to feel a sense of achievement when I've put my mind to the task at hand and I've instilled those values in our children. Work hard, take responsibility for what you do, give back to others, and be very, very proud to be an Australian. When I knock on doors and I visit small business and listen to parents, they're telling me that they feel the same way too. When we look at governments, we look at the idea of a strong leadership. We need strong leaders who can be trusted. We need leaders from within the ranks of our own community who know about and understand the local issues. We need someone who has the respect of their party and who can effectively advocate for the equitable resourcing necessary to grow Eden Monaro. We need a strong leader who is invested in long-term strategic policy. Just as families and small businesses need to be responsible for their household and business budgets, governments also need to be responsible. I do worry for the future we are leaving our children with mountains of debt and declining living standard. But you know as well as I do what those issues are. The hard part is working out how to improve our position. I have simply been out and I've listened to you, and I stand on a simple message. I will deliver on relief of cost of living pressures. I would like to build a stronger economy, back small business, and can I say small business is in my blood. I want to deliver reliable and affordable energy. I would like to fix the housing crisis that is a top 3 issue in this electorate by rebalancing the migration system, keeping Australians safe and delivering quality health care. I am a strong and dedicated voice for my region, and small business, as I said, is in my blood. You have my word that I will fight for country people against a government or any government that only delivers for its city counterparts. Thank you.
So please take your seats. And just a reminder for those at home or watching online, you can also submit questions through the Slido app. Just go to slido.com and enter the code 24119105. So you can enter them that way. Now we have a lot of questions have been submitted. We've got about an hour and a half to have a conversation. Just to let you know how this works, the questions may not be read out exactly as you've submitted. They may be edited slightly to open them out so both candidates can answer them. They must be reworded slightly to wrap a few questions together. And we're going to have this as a conversation between us rather than a straight Q&A. We'll probably get more covered that way. I would ask if you just keep your answers reasonably short so we can keep the conversation going. Get straight into it. Okay, well, I'm going to start with the second one from the top. A huge issue here in our local community is the proposed rubbish incinerator at Tarago. The community are clearly very against it. From a federal point of view, if you're elected, what can you do to help support the community in fighting against this use of Tarago to dump Sydney's rubbish on this region? I might start with you on this one, Kristy. Okay, where were we? Tarago Rubbish Incinerator, Kristy.
Really interestingly, Tarago has now been dealing with this proposal for a couple of years, which is not an issue of Tarago's own making. In fact, Goulburn Maori can't even use the current facility owned by Veolia, let alone the proposed waste incinerator. So I think it's, a bad proposal that has been lumped with this community now for a couple of years. I've been pretty clear since I've met with members of the Tarago community, even before the redistribution of Eden Monaro, as a neighbouring electorate, that I didn't support the waste incinerator. Unfortunately, there is no EPBC, so no Environmental Protection or Biodiversity Conservation Act requirements for this planning proposal. So there's no direct federal planning laws. But what I have done over the last few months is directly voice my concerns with the New South Wales government. I have written to the Premier and asked him to come to Tarago and meet directly with community members. I think it's a proposal that, clearly has impacts on local community, on the environment, on local industry, and I have expressly made my concerns known. The other concern that I have is that unfortunately, Veolia has a history of breaches with the EPA, and I'm concerned that this is the company that's proposing the waste incinerator when they can't even continue to act within their current operational guidelines. So I will continue the campaign with the community, with the New South Wales government, and to that end, as I said, I've had some direct conversations with the Premier's office over that.
That's wonderful. And Joe, done, do you think?
Look, it's nice to know that sometimes we agree on things, which is great. So I've been working over the last few months with Wendy Tuckerman. We recently had a meeting with Longwater Ag. We went to their AGM and listened to them about, obviously, talking about Veolia, unfortunately, not being a good corporate citizen and certainly not a good neighbour for a number of the farms there that stand to lose in a big way in terms of their food and water security. It is, yes, a state issue, but I think in terms of what I can do is obviously lend my support in whatever capacity I can to assist Wendy and to keep listening to the members of this community that will be directly impacted if this proposal actually goes ahead. So yes, I have voiced my support for the fact that Sydney's waste and rubbish should not be coming here.
It's wonderful. We started on a point of agreement. There we go. It was a nice soft question then, it turns out. Something that affects us locally here is the size of the federal public service. We're a town where people commute to and from Canberra, and a lot of the electorate would be in that position, particularly somewhere like Queanbeyan that's right across the border. Peter Dutton has said that he plans to cut the public service, and I suppose for those who live around Canberra, that's probably not a surprise that this is pretty normal. How do you think this is going to affect the regional workers, and what plans are in place to maybe limit impacts upon local communities, especially in a time of cost of living crisis where people really value their jobs? Might start with Joe on this one.
To answer that, and it would come as no surprise that when the announcement first came out that I had lots of emails and lots of phone calls from really concerned people about what that might look for them. I live in Cooma, it's an hour away from Canberra. I have lots of friends that work in the public service. I have lots of friends that live outside Canberra because it is a more affordable option for them. So in places like Goulburn, and someone did say to me there's about 3,000 people that commute from Goulburn to Canberra every day. Obviously we have areas like Queanbeyan, Jarrah and even Cooma, where I know people have moved because it's an easier lifestyle and it's a cheaper lifestyle, and they have their children in local schools and they work from home. What I would say is I think people grabbed hold of that one line, that first line, which was we will cut the public service, or we will look at cutting the public service. To that I'd make a couple of comments and perhaps some of my own observations, just having spoken to, as I said, a lot of my friends that work in the public service. Governments are not here to undermine individual contracts that people have in place. And as an industrial relations lawyer, I have a lot of expertise when people come to me when that has occurred. So I'm very mindful of the fact that the current arrangements that are in place for flexible working from home, for example, is an arrangement that is in place until 2027. It is not an arrangement that the coalition intends to interrupt. It's not government's place to step in as a third party to a contract between an employer and employee. The policy as it stands talks about flexible work arrangements. And what that means is, as an employee or a worker, you're free to negotiate with your employer something that works for both you and for the organisation or the agency or the department that you work for. What I would say to that is, we stand by that. That is coalition policy also, is that you are free to negotiate what works for you and works for your organisation. Obviously, when we're talking about things like cutting government spending, we need to look at every particular opportunity, and that's why we have someone like Jacinta Price, who will take a good look under the bonnet if we are elected, to make sure that we are spending your money, because it is your money, in the best and most responsible way.
Thank you for clarifying that position. Kristy, is there anything you want to say about this particular issue and the public service?
Well, I think working from home and cutting public service jobs are two separate things. And it's been clear, the line around we're cutting 36,000 public service workers, and we want to see more people working in an office as opposed to from home. So I think they're two distinct and separate issues, and it absolutely impacts people in Eden Monaro. It's not just a Canberra thing. We've got public servants from Defence Call workers in Cooma to Veterans Affairs workers in Jerrabomberra. And when we came to government in the last budget, there was over $1 billion in consultants who were filling the role of public service workers. In the Department of Veterans Affairs, for example, about 80% of the workforce was labour hire. And so it led to a situation where for over 400 days, if you put in an application as a veteran, your claim was not assigned to anyone. It took more than 400 days for your claim to be assigned to someone, let alone be assessed. So we've substantially reversed the trend there, which is really important. If a veteran puts in a claim, it should absolutely be dealt with in a meaningful time frame. So we're now seeing those claims dealt with in 21 days for the most part. But it is really important, I think, for communities to have some flexibility. We talk about decentralisation of public service jobs. That decentralisation is happening now with people being able to work from home, whether that's in Burra or in Cooma, or in Goulburn, as opposed to working in an office in Canberra. And the thing that does in our communities is make sure that they can come in and spend their, $5 for the morning tea break in a local store as opposed to in somewhere in Canberra. So, it's obviously going to be of concern to people in Eden Monaro, and I know Joe knows this, that those lines on cuts to the public service or ending work for home will have a direct impact on people in Eden Monaro. So, we will absolutely oppose that. We want to see people be able to live in different places and work in our great public service, providing services to local communities everywhere. I think it's fundamental to running a government, is making sure you've got people everywhere who can actually provide that service.
So I just want to explore this a little bit deeper. So at the moment we've got a headline that says 36,000 cuts against a position that says, no, we need these people in work. There's a good reason for them to be there. Joe, you spoke about carefully trying to save money. And so I want to come back to you and ask the question, how do you propose then as a party to find these savings that I think a lot of people would support trying to find savings? Both of you spoke about the need to try and save money where we can in government. How do you propose to find those savings carefully, precisely, while meeting that target of reducing the public service in that way?
I think the public service is only one part of that very big puzzle. Obviously, we've seen a lot of spending, and I think for every $12 that we currently spend, there's $1 of saving. So, I said in my speech earlier about I worry about leaving our children with such a big debt, and how do you repay that? And it's the responsibility of any responsible government to look for savings where they can. As I said, I think one of the largest issues that we have at the moment, which is why we've appointed Senator Price to this new portfolio, is to make sure that if we're elected, we're having a really, really good look under the bonnet. I don't know if either of us know whether or not there have been 36,000 jobs that have actually been filled. I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I've had calls to ring Centrelink a couple of times in the last month, and I waited 2 hours. In fact, my battery ran out on my phone before I got to be answered. But that's no disrespect to some very, very hardworking public servants that are out there, but how many do we need? And I guess if you're in the private sector, that's something that you look at as well. We've got small businesses that are saying they can't afford to hire anyone, so they're going back into their own businesses. So I guess in terms of trying to work out where you save, that's about making sure we have a look under the bonnet at everything, at all the agencies. Where is the money best being spent, and could it be best spent somewhere else?
Thanks. I think that's about as detailed as you can probably be, because I appreciate it's a hard question to answer when you're not actually in power and you don't have access to the data. So I appreciate your answer there. On the flip side, similar question then, Kristy. You're committed to fill in the roles that need to be filled, and yet you also speak of we need to make some savings in government spending. How would you propose to do that and balance those two positions?
Well, I think we've done that over the last 3 years. We've now had 3 budgets, and it comes down to, well, this will be our 4th budget actually. It comes down to priorities. We have said, and the record shows, we have banked about 80% of upward revisions in taxation. We have saved the Australian taxpayers now $70 billion on interest repayments by reducing government debt by $170 billion. And that is cutting a bunch of programs that were rorted or there was wastage, making savings within departments, telling them to rein in their spending. We have done some really careful work with each department, and as a member of the ministry, I've done that in my own department, make sure that either money was being spent for the purposes it's outlined in each budget line item, or we take that funding back. There has to be an outcome for every taxpayer when we're spending government dollars. And it is clear from the $170 billion worth of savings we've made that there were programs that were not achieving things for the Australian people, and that is the aim of any government, of any public service. So those direct records show that there have been significant savings made, which has allowed us as a government to contribute to the things we think every Australian will be able to take advantage of. Things like cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, increasing paid parental leave, increasing rent assistance by 45%, making sure that we are working with the Australian people on reducing their everyday costs, including a tax cut for every taxpayer, whilst we've saved the budget bottom line from what it was. It's also at a time where there's been over 1 million new jobs created, which is the largest job creation in history of any government. It is really important that we continue to focus on the things that Australians are asking for, though, and that is continued cost of living issues.
You just make a really quick point about that, and I think it's great that we pay down debt, but we've seen an additional $347 million in spending, so that's an additional $33,000 for every Australian household. So if you're spending more than you're repaying, then it goes back to this point about being responsible and having to find savings somewhere.
I guess the debt being reduced by $170 billion and the interest being $70 billion saved, again, significantly outweighs the increased spending. And that increased spending has been things like indexation on pensions, energy bill relief, it's the cheaper childcare measures, cost of living relief that is going to every Australian at the moment. This is at a time where we've talked about cost of living across the aisles of Parliament, but only one side of politics has voted consistently in favour of those cost of living relief measures. And we've got to continue to do those things. Housing is a massive issue right across the country, particularly in regional areas. We can't continue to say we've got a housing crisis but not spend money on it. And that's a priority of our government, one we have made clear, we have contributed significant amounts of money to, and one that I think you will continue to see dollars contributed to. But it is the three levels of government that need to come together to solve an issue like this.
Talking of cost of living and housing, there's a question here that asks, if you were elected, how would you regulate to stop landlords from holding on to empty housing and just banking housing, as that contributes to people being priced out of rentals and prevents people from buying a home? So what can be done in that space to help with the cost of housing? Who'd like to go first?
I mean, that's obviously a really tricky one, because state governments can either incentivise or de-incentivise landlords and property owners through a range of their mechanisms. And we've seen that, for example, in Western Australia, where the West Australian government incentivised landlords to put their properties back on the long-term rental list through an incentive scheme. We've seen in Victoria where they've tried another approach, which is if your house is in a short-term rental market, they look at a tax on that property. Federally, though, I think it's much more difficult for us to incentivise or de-incentivise that process. The real issue here is supply. We've got to make sure we are building more homes across this country, which is why there has been $32 billion in housing initiatives from the rental all the way to first home buyers and trying to incentivise developers to do more build to rent. So we know, for example, in regional and rural areas, the big issue is around enabling infrastructure. So it's the water, the sewer, the roads to actually get developers or councils to develop parcels of land that can then be on-sold to community. That's why we have created the Housing Support Program, a direct result of feedback from councils around how we can get more homes on the ground in rural and regional areas. That $27 million for the Marulan Sewage Treatment Plant is a direct result of having worked with council to understand that by increasing the capacity at that plant, it will mean more homes will be able to be developed in Marulan itself. So we will, as a federal government, continue to work with the other levels of government to get housing released, whether that's through build to rent, social and affordable housing, expanding the first home buyers guarantee, which we've done, or trying to make it easier for developers to actually get into the market itself.
Okay, so that mostly sounds like trying to get other supply in the market. So there's nothing that we can do to stop people from just banking empty houses. That's what it sounded like a little bit to me. Jo, what about
I think
your
just
thoughts?
on that, and as an observation on the many street stalls, particularly on the coast, I would say this comes up quite often when houses do sit empty for quite some time. And I do think I've had meetings with local councils about this and just some of the think outside the box issues, because social housing is, as we know, a responsibility of the states, and the states have failed over the years in their responsibility to build more social housing. But there is not one single person whose door I've knocked on that's a renter that when I said to them, if you had the choice, would you like to own your own home? The answer is a resounding yes. So it's how do we get people out of rentals and into their own home? One thing I do really like, and I really subscribe to this view, is practical policy. It's one of the reasons I put my hand up. We need to be listening to people. We need to be listening to people in Eden Monaro, because that is the only way that you come up with good practical policy that has a positive impact on the people that live around you. One thing I was really, really pleased to see was for the last 2 years, the Coalition has been out and met with hundreds of local councils around Australia to ask them, what are the roadblocks to your developments going ahead? And our housing infrastructure program, I am really proud to say that that is just a very, very practical policy which will have such a positive impact on Eden Monaro. I've met with each of the 5 local councils that are in this electorate to explain to them what that program does. It's a $5 billion fund, of which $1.5 billion has been ring-fenced for regional Australia. What that will do is provide a competitive grants process to local councils to enable them to have the money to invest in enabling infrastructure. So, excuse the pun, but there is a roadblock right at the beginning of these developments when there's land. If you are lucky enough to be able to have land that's available for development in your area, that they are lacking the funds to put in that infrastructure, like your connecting roads, your water, your sewerage, your telecommunications. And that fund will enable councils to do that. So we can then allow our local builders to get on with doing the job that they do best, which is build houses, bring down prices and allow people to purchase houses in the areas that they want to live in.
Thanks. That sounds like a very similar answer in the sense of we're going to build our way out of the problem. We need to build more houses is essentially what both of you are saying here, with slightly nuanced answers around that.
It's a top 3 issue.
It is. It's absolutely.
It's a top 3 issue. Yeah. When I head around this electorate, I mean, cost of living is just hands down number 1, and we probably agree on that. Number 2 is skilled staff shortages, crying out for staff in particular areas. But number 3 is directly connected to number 2. So if you speak to an employer and they'll say, even if I can get staff, I don't have anywhere for them to live. And we've seen private sector go out and have to create solutions for themselves. We particularly know in the aged care sector that aged care organisations take it upon themselves at a huge financial cost to go out and source whatever rental accommodation they can find. And that includes enlisting the help of organisations like Rotary that will go to farmers and say, do you have any spare cottages on your farm? And we will create a database so we can make sure that when we have nurses coming to this region, we have somewhere for them to live. Now, people will say to me, is that the responsibility of a private organisation to fund those kinds of things? That's 50 or 100 houses, and that's 50 or 100 bonds. That's a huge financial cost to the private sector.
It certainly is one of the big issues. We've got a lot of questions about housing, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on it, going through some of these questions. Now, I don't have any knowledge to back the veracity of the claim in this, so I'm just going to put it as is, and you can correct the claim if you feel it's wrong. But the claim is made that combined local, state and federal taxes account for about 60% of the cost of a new building. And so the question is whether it's 60% or whether it's a high proportion of the tax. Essentially what they're saying is the taxes are really high. What can the federal government do to help reduce those taxes and therefore encourage people to build houses?
You happy for me to? Yeah, look, I might have just answered that in part in my last response, but being married to a builder for the last 30 years, I can definitely assure you that those percentages are correct. Unfortunately, I think there was something in the media just recently in the last week about if you had an average build of, say, about 1 to 1.1 million, then the cost that you're referring to about $560,000. So before you even get off the ground, there's a huge amount of money that you've got to spend in getting to that point before you actually start seeing something come out of the ground.
Yeah, look, We've been really clear that housing is a big issue and you can't vacate the field on housing. And unfortunately, that was the previous position. Each level of government has to spend money to do something more in the housing space. Each level of government needs to look at how they can streamline the process. So from my point of view, I've brung together the local government ministers across the country to ask how they can help streamline the process. We've brought planning ministers together across the country, and each planning minister now has a set of targets about how they can streamline planning across the country, because planning is one of those critical issues, and unfortunately, frequently, local councils get dumped with it's your fault. And frequently councils are just implementing state planning policies. But you have to invest in it and you have to want to make it work. So I think that's really critical up front. It is really important though that there is a will and a desire to do more in this space. And as I said, it will require 3 levels of government coming together to do that. National Cabinet has made housing one of its agenda items on more than one meetings occasion, because it is really important, I think, that the Prime Minister and First Ministers around the country are having this discussion. Each jurisdiction has some nuances about it, about the planning processes and what's required in that particular area. But each jurisdiction has a desire to make sure that housing is dealt with. And it is not just, the homes that we're building for ourselves to own. It's the homes we're building for people to rent, the homes we're building that the public should have. And unfortunately, we've seen too many of those public and social homes across New South Wales sold off. We need to make sure that we've got a full continuum of housing in our region. And we've invested in it in Eden Monaro. There's a housing complex of 6 units just about to be completed in Cooma for women and children fleeing domestic violence. There's just been a $4.7 million announcement for 12 units for older women who are at risk of homelessness. We have just seen the completion, and families are just about to move in to 7 homes in Yass, who have unfortunately been the target of family or domestic violence. So there is work that is currently happening, and there is more announcements that have been made, including a big partnership with Homes for New South Wales in Bega for a housing development. It is really important we continue to build on those things though, because we can't talk about it and say it's an issue and then cut money from the housing budget. We have to continue to invest in it because it will require, as I said, the 3 levels of government investing in it and making it a priority ongoing for there to be any change in our communities.
Just want to touch on that. You talk about this being a multi-layer solution required. It's also a very long-term solution that's required. This is something that affects a whole number of generations, and so it's not something that can be fixed in a 3-year political cycle. How much will do you think there is for work to not just occur at the multiple levels, but also across the aisle in more of a bipartisan approach, so that whoever's in government, we keep moving in a direction that's going to help particularly the younger generation get into housing, for example? What are your feelings about that?
I've often been heard to say that no one party should have exclusive ownership of particular issues that affect all Australians. And I do think there are several issues that require long-term strategic policy reform, and they require us to agree, because rentals just don't affect someone that votes Liberal or someone that votes Labor in the same way that we need long-term structural reform in areas like health and in education. So housing is one of those basic human rights that needs to be looked at with a long-term lens. And I know in this day and age, everyone wants an answer to something yesterday, and there certainly are policies that won't solve everything, but will go some way towards providing some fairly short-term relief for Australians. But I think, if I could be so bold as to say, governments of all persuasions have probably not long-term structurally reformed and provided policy, and that's what this country wants to see. I know just this morning at the markets, I had half a dozen people come up to me and say, we need a 4-term fixed-term government because 3 years is just not long enough for you to be able to get in and actually do anything that is meaningful. So I certainly would support the fact that, yes, we do need to continue to look for long-term structural reform in this space. It's something that the Coalition is very much invested in, would I say, from a regional perspective, ensuring that our regions get these developments up and running, that we create local jobs. I mean, as I said, one policy is not going to fix everything, but if you start talking about housing, then you start conversations about skills shortages in the construction industry. 12% of Eden Monaro of their population is involved in the construction industry. These are tradies that we need to be listening to. These are builders out there who are struggling to attract apprentices. As I said, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, but yes, some of it falls to the states. But certainly from our perspective, housing supply is something that, as I said, is a top 3 issue for us.
Yeah, bipartisanship on housing should absolutely be there. And it's something I hope comes perhaps in the next term, because we haven't seen it this term, but there is a requirement to continue to invest in housing at the federal level as there is at the state level, as there is at the local level. And we have to start thinking about, rather than scoring political points, what is going to bring the biggest difference in local communities. And we've argued over the Housing Australia Future Fund, for example, but it is clear to me that housing is one of those issues that we will need to invest in as a country, this year, next year, in 20 years and 50 years. So it's important that we put it as a key priority of the Australian people, make sure that it is funded regardless of who's in government, and continue on with the program of works. It's really vital. I think that there are some key issues which, whilst we might not agree on all the nuance in the policy, that we actually say this is a key issue for every Australian. If you're in government, yes, let's do it this way. If we're in government, we do it this way. But housing is going to be one of those issues that every member of the community will have a view on, that every member of the community will want to ensure that they've got, a key to a home that they can go to and feel safe and secure every night of the year. So I think it is one of those issues that requires bipartisanship and needs to, not even just bipartisanship, it requires the entire Parliament working together. And it will be required the next term of Parliament and many after that.
Well, that sounds very hopeful. I look forward to seeing a long-term housing strategy that all parties are agreed to. There we go, that's a target for the next term.
And you're recording this, so you'll remind us.
It's all recorded, it's on YouTube, you both said it. And as the electorate, we can hold you accountable for that if you get elected. Wouldn't that be wonderful to have a long-term, multi-year plan that everyone's signed up to, that we don't have to keep changing? There are lots of theories about why we have a housing shortage. I'm going to ask you about some of them now. So one theory that's put out is that much of the empty housing issue is driven due to negative gearing, for example. And so people negative gear their primary income with empty housing and business premises, etc., to offset their primary costs. What can be done in that space around negative gearing to free up housing and encourage people to own their own home?
I'm not sure that negative gearing is the key contributor to people not being able to enter the housing market. Absolutely, it will be a factor, but I don't think it's the driving factor. For example, in Eden Monaro, we're more than 1,100 homes down on where we were 5 years ago because of a number of natural disasters. It's, as Joe mentioned, we've got a skill shortage across the country, and that's evident in Eden Monaro. It's one of the key reasons things like free TAFE make a difference. We've had over 36,000 people sign up to TAFE through the construction sector. because we've got to continue to train people locally. And the other thing I think that has been really important in talking about free TAFE is talking about the value of vocational training and education. When my husband left school in year 11 and went to TAFE and did a plumbing apprenticeship, you know, it was it's because you're not smart enough to go to uni. And I've literally had someone ask me whether he can read. Like, I don't know a tradie that can run a business if they can't read. And to, you know, the mindset that vocational training and education is less than, I think is really detrimental to getting more people into some of those key traditional industries that we have. So it's why it will be more important going forward that we talk about TAFE on the same level as we talk about university. Whatever the skill, whatever the trade, whatever the study is going to be as equally important to our economy and local community as anything else happening. But I think it is going to be really important that we deal with the supply issues, that we start streamlining some of the development issues, that we are working on the enabling infrastructure, and that we continue to invest in housing. We have said there won't be any changes to negative gearing. That policy was taken in 2019 and roundly kicked off the table by the Australian people. So we're not going to go back with the same policy again. What we will do is work on the other side of housing, and that is making sure that we are investing in it, we're incentivising it, and we're getting more tradies in the system to build it.
We share the fact that we're both married to a tradie, and I was only just saying to someone this morning that the last apprentice that my husband took on got an ATAR of 94 in his HSC, and he went home to his mum and said, I really, really would like to do a trade and I'd like to do an apprenticeship with Anthony. And she turned around and said to him, only dumb people go to TAFE. Now that's 5 years ago. I think there's a very big shift of the dial that needs to take place, and I think over the last couple of decades we've drifted into this space where we think that the be-all and end-all is to go to university. Certainly, as I said, my first degree was nursing. I then took myself off to TAFE and did a legal admin course for 12 months. I then did a 4-year TAFE course to become a licensed conveyancer, which I did for 10 years, and then I went off and did my university degree. So I certainly see the value in both. What I would say, though, is something that we're very keen to try and kickstart again, which has gone off the boil, is this idea of school-based apprenticeships. I do think Eden Monaro struggles, and I know that employers struggle to get apprentices, regardless of whether or not you provide a free TAFE course or not, if for no other reason that places like Queanbeyan, Jarrah and Googong are very close to Canberra, and when you have a young person that could go and do an apprenticeship for 4 years and get paid a fairly low wage, and I'll get to what that produces at the end, but the alternative is you could nick over to Canberra and do a level 1 or 2 government job and be paid $80,000 or $90,000 off the bat. That's pretty hard to refuse. So I think sometimes money is not the answer. It's about going back and making sure that we're creating a good pathway, and that one of those things is to make sure that employers reform really, really good relationships with their local high schools and making sure that they're invited to their careers fair days, to make sure that they're on the list when someone wants to come and do work experience. That is part of the puzzle that I think will help alleviate some of the tradie shortages that we have, because we know employers are crying out for apprentices and they just can't get them. I mean, I guess to my point, I would say fee-free TAFE sounds good, but do people finish it? When they come out, what incentive is there for them to stay with an employer? I guess there's some of the issues when I go and speak to joinery shops, developers, anyone involved in the construction industry that wants to employ local kids to make sure that they stay local. We need to be just thinking a little bit more outside the box.
Thank you. We're going to move on from housing. I think we spent quite a while there. We're met in the church, so it won't be any surprise. There's some questions around religious freedom and all sorts of questions around this. So during the last term, it looked like we were getting really close to bipartisanship on a Religious Freedom Act. Unfortunately, that didn't get over the line, and I don't necessarily want us to litigate why that didn't get over the line. Looking forward, what would your plans be for a Religious Freedom Act during the next term of Parliament?
Yeah, I think this is another area where this requires the Parliament to come together, because this isn't a partisan issue. It really needs to be one where we're having conversations as a community and as a Parliament to make sure that the settings are right. Absolutely, people should have the freedom to practice their own religion and feel safe in a particular space. Allow children of certain faith to go to certain schools and have priority over others. But we also want to make sure that those freedoms don't come at the expense of any other group in our society, which is why I think it's incredibly important that the Parliament actually comes together and has a serious discussion about how we can make sure we are protecting religious freedoms, protecting the ability to enrol kids in religious schools and, raise them and educate them in the faith in which their family is, but also that doesn't come at the expense of, another minority group for a student or a teacher. So it does require the Parliament to come together, I think, and have an adult conversation about how we can respect rights, because, the Anti-Discrimination Act is there to protect everybody, and it should be the same in any religious discrimination setting. It should be there to protect everybody, which is why we've tried hard to get some bipartisan agreement over another approach to that bill, and hopefully those discussions will continue, because, as I said, I think it's past time that as a Parliament, as communities, we come together and say exactly what we intend to do, which won't impinge on anyone's rights or freedoms.
Joe?
I'm often asked this question because I am a Christian and I sent my children to an independent Christian school. And there are many of my friends who are just like me that will not speak out for what they believe in because they fear a backlash or they fear I said to someone the other day, I think we've lost the ability somewhat to have a civil conversation or civil discourse or debate in our society. And I often quote this Morgan Freeman saying, which is, just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I hate you, and we need to relearn that in society. And I think we've started to go down this very dangerous path where if I have a conversation with you and we don't agree on something, that the other person is wrong. We need to start going away from that kind of binary conversation. And I think I mentioned earlier about the parents' right to be able to make choices about how they raise their children. I also firmly believe, as does a coalition government, that you're free to speak out about what your beliefs are without being ridiculed or told that you're wrong. I think over the last 15 or so months, this country has seen something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, which is a particular faith being felt very unsafe. And I must say, when we talk about this, I used to think, that only happens in Sydney, it doesn't happen in Eden Monaro. And I went on local radio a couple of weeks ago to talk about the fact that a number of Jewish people that live in Queanbeyan had reached out to me to say that they didn't feel safe walking down the street anymore because they had people walking past, flicking the Hitler salute and making comments like, I wish Hitler came back to deal with the Jewish people. Now, I find that sort of stuff disgusting. I'm pretty sure you all find that disgusting. In the same way, if you were any other faith and that sort of comment was made to you, we are Australia and that is not Australian. I do think that a coalition government has been very quick to say we won't tolerate that sort of behaviour in Australia, and if I don't care who you are, if you do that sort of thing, then there are consequences, and so there should be. That is a fundamental right of all Australians, is to feel safe, regardless of what your faith is, of whatever your culture is.
And it's a difficult thing to legislate, so we do appreciate how tricky that is when you have rights that appear to be in conflict with one another, and to try and find a safe balance for everyone to be respected and safe. So we do appreciate this is a difficult issue that's going to take a while to talk through, but obviously we hope that eventually we can get to a bipartisan position that we can have everyone's rights protected, including those of faith communities, to worship in the way they see fit. And
Mike, I think we just did. I mean, the recent passing of legislation in relation to mandatory sentencing was one of those examples, and I think that was a recognition of the fact that people need to feel safe, and that's a fundamental right that we want to preserve in this country.
That legislation, as well as, criminalising the sale of Nazi memorabilia, criminalising the Nazi salute, Nazi flags, anti-doxing laws, so that if it is now a criminal offence to release people's personal details as an act of revenge online. There are a whole range of laws that have now been implemented because we recognise that, unfortunately, overseas conflicts have made their way into this country and they have been politicised, and that's not something we want to see in this country. We should come together as a people, as one of the shining examples of multiculturalism across the world, to say in this country you can practice whatever faith you are, you can be who you want to be, and we go about our business because it's not our business to be involved in other people's choices.
Fair enough. Given that people of faith want to be able to practice their faith in every aspect of their lives, many faith-based organisations have rules around who they can employ or who are volunteers within there, and so we've seen, particularly around Christian schools and faith-based schools, that has come under question in recent times, whether it's appropriate to, I'll use a Christian school for example, as we're sitting in a church, for a Christian school, should they have the right to only employ Christian teachers, for example, as part of practicing their religion? Many Christians feel quite strongly about that, and many people of all faiths do. How can that be protected within legislation to ensure that we can continue to employ people who agree with our faith position, much like a political party has the right to, you wouldn't employ someone from the Labour Party to work for the Liberal Party, for example, or vice versa.
That has absolutely happened.
Has it? Someone didn't do their checks then.
Sometimes it's done for a variety of reasons. Our neighbour just down the road, Stephen Jones, who's just retiring, the member for Whitlam, his chief of staff is a former Liberal staffer. Sometimes, these things happen. But I think it is important, and it's one of the things I was just alluding to, is that, those things are delicate and they need to be handled sensitively. And we want to make sure that, if you're a Christian school, that you prioritise sending Christian faith children there first. We also don't want to impinge on other people's rights just for the sake of it. And we have to protect, for example, kids who are growing up who, suddenly discover that, they're not heterosexual, that they don't conform to what mum and dad, model and display. So I think they are quite delicate and sensitive issues, and that's what I was saying. I think we really need to come together as a parliament and make sure that when we are putting in place anti-discrimination laws or religious discrimination laws, that we're doing so based on the discussions in our local communities, the feedback we get, and making sure that those laws are going to benefit the most number of people for the right reasons.
I work heavily in this space as a lawyer in terms of acting for people that have been discriminated in their workplace. But what I would say is we need to make sure that as a government we're setting laws that don't impinge on people's individual rights. What I do see and what I've advocated for a very long time is a streamlining of our anti-discrimination laws. If a client comes to me and says, I'd like to commence proceedings because I've just been discriminated against in the workplace, there are no less than 9 pieces of legislation I need to explain to them, 9 different cost jurisdictions, 9 different courts and tribunals. I have a hard enough time getting my head around it as the expert, let alone employers who are trying to navigate this minefield when they are employing people and what is it that they can do and they can't do. And obviously employees are even less knowledgeable when they're coming along. But what I would say is, back to some of the comments that I've made earlier, I think it is a tricky area. We need to just make sure that the laws that we have in place work as best as they can for the most number of people.
Thank you. Appreciate the thought that's gone into those answers, and I think we'd all agree that where children are concerned, it's different, and so that's why the question specifically is about teachers and staff in that space. We're going to move on from religious freedom. I want to move on to health, particularly some questions around this. And the first one is around mental health. It's very sad that one of the leading causes of death among men in this country is actually suicide. Men's mental health is in crisis, particularly in regional areas. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of this living in regional areas. And this feels like a bit of a reversal. We often have men talking about women's issues. Now we're going to have women talking about men's issues. So that's a refreshing change. What can be done to help address the tragically high suicide rate among men, particularly in regional areas, but across Australia?
No amount of money, I would say, would fix what I see as health is fast becoming, for me, when I go around this electorate, the number one issue that people talk to me about. I will say not so much in the men's mental health space, but more around teenage mental health. But the answer is the same for this. We are invested and very much want to be in a space where we return to prevention, early intervention, and primary care, because that's what the federal government is responsible for. We talk often about what the end consequences might be, and I think there needs to be a better understanding and policies set around how we actually stop from getting to that spot in the first place. I will say I was really proud last year when we came out with a very early announcement that we would invest $500 million to restore critical Medicare funding for mental health support. So we know during COVID and the bushfires, we had 20 of those sessions, which were cut to 10. And I think being able to restore those to 20 is just one of the ways in which we can help restore early intervention in relation to men's mental health, but mental health in general.
Yeah, I think mental health is a clear issue that continues to come up, and what I think is fantastic is that we're actually talking about it. For many years, it was one of those issues that just wasn't talked about. And people had their challenges and we just let them go over there and have them. Now it is mainstream, and we talk about it frequently and we invest in it. So we've opened mental health hubs. There's one in Goulburn, there's one in Queanbeyan, there's one in Bega. These are walk-in facilities that you can go to no appointment necessary, no payment necessarily, and you're immediately met with a peer support worker, a counsellor, and you can get referrals immediately to psychologists. They are really important across our community. There's 3 in Eden Monaro already, but there's numerous that have opened around the country because we believe you've got to invest in it. From an acute mental health facility, and we've got those in our hospitals, to subacute facilities, to our growing facilities in the teenage space with Headspace. You know, we've got a fantastic Headspace here in Goulburn. We've opened a new one in Narooma. We've got them in Bega, Eden, Cooma and Queanbeyan, but and Yass, and they're a growing need too. The best part about those Headspace services, and there's been more opened, is that there is a youth reference group which basically set out the strategic direction for the organisation to go and impact as many young lives as possible. And I've met the youth reference group here, and they do a fantastic job in trying to, make sure people are aware of their services. And, at the Goulburn Multicultural Festival, they were out there with their tent, trying to drag people in. But one of the key things I think that is required, particularly for men's mental health, is that it's not just down to one individual or one person. It is very much a community thing. If you know that a neighbour or a family member is struggling, it's important that we all have access and understand where the services are that we can actually point them to. Because that is one of the biggest issues, is people seeking out supports for themselves. We know the success of the Are You OK Day, which is great, but we have to be doing that every day of the year, and it's incumbent upon all of us to know where the services are and where you can get help or point people in the right direction, and there are some services available locally for that.
Absolutely. And men, we need to talk to each other. That's what I'd add. Don't bottle it inside, talk to one another. I know we're not taught that as kids, and it's wonderful to hear that the youth are being encouraged to reach out and get help and start that habit at a young age so that they don't grow up to be typical, I'm going to say Australian men, but then I'm going to insult everyone because I'm not Australian. British men too do it the same, so I won't insult you. Moving on from that to another area of health. Dental care and dental health is a key indicator of so many other health issues as well. And yet many are priced out of dental health in this country, and particularly those in lower socioeconomic areas. Has there been any thought of having a policy of putting dental onto Medicare so that more people can access dental and have a good health in that space? Jo, I might start with you this time.
Lots of people ask me about this, particularly people that don't have private health and can't access the dental care that they need. And we know that bad teeth actually compound or exacerbate other health conditions that people have as well. I guess the short answer for me, and obviously I'm not in government, so I do apologise. I'm probably not as detailed in my responses, maybe what Kristy would be, but I think it would come down to, well, if there's money there for it, then we should be considering it.
Yeah, I think dental's one of those issues that continues to go back and forth, and there was some broad agreement back in the 80s about bringing dental into Medicare, but at the time the Dental Association reneged on that, so there's some long history to it. We've just provided an additional $1.6 billion for public health around the country, which brings this year's budget spend to $33 billion. We know that there are community health dentists that practice usually out of our hospitals in the community health rooms. And they do a range of things, particularly for people on the lower socioeconomic scale. But it is about trying to make sure that we continue to have access to them because usually their books are quite full. But any extra dollars spent in public health, in our public health system, I think is good spend. I think it's a fundamental part of being Australian is that we want to make healthcare as accessible and affordable as possible. And it is one of the great things about being Australian is having access to that green Medicare card, which you'll be able to access a range of healthcare measures. But dental will be one of those ones that we continue to look at. As I said, we provide funding to the states which provide dentists into community health centres around our state, and hopefully we'll continue to see more of that.
That's good. And Jo, do you think there's anything more that we can be doing on top of what's already been done?
Just on the community health, so you often have, well, I'm going to take that back. You don't often have dentists in those community health centres, and when you do, I know that people are waiting 12 months and beyond. So I guess from that perspective is making sure that we've got people that we can employ in the community health space to alleviate some of that pressure. I know in different health professional spaces, when you're looking at, for example, the newish Bega Hospital down the coast has wards that just simply aren't open because they don't have people there, and if they employ locums, then they come at a cost of like $3,000 a day. So I guess my point would be not just looking at whether or not dentistry should come under Medicare, but in the event that it doesn't, making sure that we properly equip our hospitals to make sure that there isn't a 12-month waiting list.
Thank you. One of the areas of issues, dentists, rural GPs, we have issues with getting a lot of the healthcare professionals to come and stay in rural and regional areas, for example. So personally, I've been here 6 years. I've had 4 GPs already in that time. Every time I get one, they move on and they go back to Sydney or another big city. What can be done to fix this shortage of health workers? Let's keep it broad, because GPs are one of them, health workers generally, in rural and regional areas, and encourage them to stay in country areas and be part of that community and provide that service there.
Yeah. This is a space that I've sat in for a very long time. Obviously, as I said, my first degree was nursing. I majored in health law at university. It's an area that I have a deep interest in, and regardless of whether I was a candidate or not, have advocated heavily in this space, particularly around access or lack of access to GPs in Eden Monaro. Last Friday, I had Senator Anne Ruston in Merimbula, and I convened a health roundtable of not just GPs, but mental health professionals, community access centres, anyone really that intersects, or aged care, anyone that intersects with general practice. There's been a lot of talk about bulk billing. What I would say is there's not one person that I speak to that doesn't say bulk billing is pretty much a moot point for me if I can't just see a doctor in the first place. So, as I said, over the last 12 months, I've met with a number of the local GPs and health professionals. We know what the problems are, and I said this earlier, it's about coming up with solutions for that, and no one policy is going to fix the problem. I don't use the word crisis lightly, but particularly on the coast, access to GPs is at crisis level. We have GPs who are either retirement age or beyond retirement age that have said to me they don't want to retire until a replacement is found for them. One doctor did say to me on Friday, I'm sure the government thinks I'm going to die at my desk because I'm not leaving here until I've found someone to take my place. But I was really pleased again last year when we came out with an early policy announcement about investing $400 million into developing a GP talent pipeline. One of the biggest barriers to attracting GPs to country areas is private practices compete with super clinics and with hospitals. That's just the harsh reality. What this $400 million will do is provide pay parity and leave entitlement parity. So if you want to go and practice as a GP, you are going to be no worse off than if you were snaffled up by the hospital system or a super clinic. One thing I would say is super clinics are a good idea, I think particularly in areas like Queanbeyan and Goulburn, but for places like Bega and Merimbula and Eden and Cooma, when you can't attract doctors in the first place, I wonder how we're going to attract doctors to these super clinics. We know that hospitals even find it difficult to bring in specialist services, and we're paying locums $3,000 a day. I mean, that's our money that is, I don't think, being well spent. So it's certainly a huge issue across the country, but very, very critical in Eden Monaro. We know that we want a strong pipeline of home-trained GPs, and that is critical to delivering what the federal government's responsibility is, which is delivering primary health care.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, training a doctor isn't, a 2-year thing. It's, it's 7, 8, 9, 10 years, depending on the specialisations they go into. And it's something that we should have, as a country, been focusing on for a long, long period of time, and unfortunately has not been the focus. Freezing Medicare rebates has seen less people go into general practitioner roles than ever before. So one of the investments in Medicare is around tripling the incentives for bulk billing, trying to increase the rebates paid to doctors so that it is attractive to them. The big announcement we made, that $8.5 billion investment in Medicare, was all around workforce. So more Commonwealth-supported places for medical students at university, incentives for those medical students to then go into GP specialisation, waiving HECS fees for doctors and nurse practitioners who then go out and practice in rural and regional Australia. We've invested heavily in rural medical schools because we know, and the data tells us, if you train in a regional area, you're more likely to stay there. And the training facility that ANU has up at the Goulburn Hospital here is fantastic. And I met 8 local doctors, 4 of whom were from regional areas, 4 of whom were from the city, who said, actually, I wanted something different in my training because I know if I come here, I'm going to get to do the entire rounds of a hospital and not just one section of it. And that's the advantage that we have in regional areas, being able to really, give people that breadth of training experience. And one of the other big things is working with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. We know we've got overseas doctors that come in and their certification has to be ticked off. We're working with them to streamline that program so that doctors from New Zealand or the UK or South Africa will actually be able to go through a quicker program because the medical training is very similar to what happens in Australia. So we've invested really heavily in the resource side of things, but it is not a short-term thing to get a doctor, and that's why there has to be some continued presence, some continued investment and incentivisation for GPs, particularly getting them out to rural Australia.
Yeah, thank you. One final question on health, and then we're going to touch on a couple of other subjects pretty quickly. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and keep the answers short so we can get through a few things. One final question. This is a bit niche, but I'm going to broaden it out a bit. Recently, we were fortunate enough to have a new hospital built here in Goulburn. That's a wonderful facility, which we're very lucky to have. However, the number of beds that were put in was exactly the same as was in the old hospital. And yet, we've grown about 25% in the last few years as a town, and we're rapidly increasing in size, particularly in the northern sector of Goulburn. I'm sure that's not a unique case around this electorate. And I know that both federal and state governments have responsibility for funding this space. It's not something you can solve on your own. But what could you do to rectify the lack of beds and perhaps the lack of future investment when hospitals like Goulburn are being built so that enough beds are put in to allow for population growth rather than always being behind the curve here?
Yeah, very frustrating. We have heard from numerous people across the Goulburn Maori region that there was what would they consider a real lack of planning and foresight for the continued growth of this region. So we will continue to work with New South Wales Health on how they can make sure that they are catering to a community's needs. As Joe pointed out, we've got another hospital in Bega which, absolutely was built for future growth. So it depends on what the planning strategy was at a particular time as to how many beds that have been put in there. I think more critically than just the bed numbers is the services that a hospital provides. And we want to see our regional hospitals being able to provide as many services as possible to a local community, and our community not having to travel long distances to actually get access to all different types of healthcare. So as a federal government, we are a funder of public health, of public hospitals, but the states are responsible for the planning and the strategy around them. So my role here would be one of advocacy, working with the community to identify those critical services and bed numbers that need to be implemented across our region to ensure that it's right for a growing community.
Joan?
I often bang on about long-term strategic policy planning, and I know it's not sexy and everyone wants an answer yesterday, but I do think it comes back to making sure that you've got the right planning mechanisms in place, something that I've heavily advocated for, not just to address health issues, but broader issues such as housing, is a national population plan. I think it's something that is critical to the future of Australia in terms of what we do and where we place our resources. I mean, if you plan properly, you will know that based on current growth, that this is how many people will be moving or potentially retiring to any particular area. So we need a Monaro, and you plan accordingly. You can say, okay, well in 20 years' time, this is what the population is, and we need to make sure that we're funding, health, education, infrastructure, and housing accordingly. So I do think, unfortunately, poor planning sometimes leads to these decisions. It's interesting where we say perhaps this isn't big enough, yet as we've said previously, we do have hospitals that are beautiful, but they aren't properly staffed. So even if you did increase the size capacity, the next issue will be you need to have people working in them.
Exactly right here. Okay, we're going to do some really quick fire questions. I know this is a really unusual. I mean, you've got a minister and two politicians on stage. We're going to.
This is like dog or cat?
No. These are proper questions, but we're going to get through a few more quite quick fire. First one's about cost of living. What can be done? Real practical things. Maybe name your top 2 things you could do to reduce the cost of electricity and gas for households.
Obviously, electricity rebates is one, but long-term planning is the other.
Awesome.
Long-term planning, a good mix of renewables, solar, hydro, nuclear, cutting red tape for small business.
I'll let you off that was 3, but because some of them were the same.
I have another one.
No, sorry, some of them were the same. I'll let you off. Next question. There's a proposed, what's being termed the Ute Tax policy. How can we guarantee that farmers and businesses and tradies, etc., all really important things locally, are not negatively impacted by this change?
Fake news. There is no Ute tax. It's a vehicle efficiency standard. Mm-hmm. Australia was the only country, along with Russia, to not have one. And the MTAA, the Motor Traders Association, have come out and said this is a good policy for Australia. It hasn't decreased the interest or investment of anyone in vehicles, particularly hybrid vehicles in this country.
Eden Monaro, as I said, 12% of our population is construction. I just want to make a couple of points about this because it is something, is an issue that people often come and talk to me about. And it's not because they disagree with this idea of EVs. I want to raise a couple of issues. So, at the opening of this present Parliament, Labor promised us transparent debate, yet in relation to this particular piece of legislation, there was no debate. I think this extends to a number of other issues, and this idea in a community where good debate brings the best outcomes and proper consultation also brings the best outcomes. So Kristy's right, the legislation sets a cap on the total emissions of cars that a manufacturer sells, okay, so which effectively limits your market supply. It does drive up prices of new vehicles that aren't electric. And I'm really sorry, but MTAA last week brought out a statement which had a look at the different types of cars and what the additional costs might be on top of that. What they're talking about, and I'm sorry, I'm going to read from this because they're specific. The average new Ford will be hit with an extra $2,959. The average Toyota, $2,800, and the average Kia about $3,000. That is, unfortunately, when I go and meet with car yards, a tax that they either try and absorb themselves or they pass on to the consumer. It does undermine the viability of local dealerships, and often I know that some of my dealerships in my area are intergenerational family businesses. It does penalise people that choose, and we are a country where you are free to choose what you buy. It does penalise people who want to buy petrol, who want to buy a diesel, who want to buy a hybrid. And it provides massive subsidies to Tesla and Chinese manufactured EV vehicles. Now, there are tradies out there that will say to me, I need a four-wheel drive to be able to do my job. And 12% of the population, as I said here, are in the construction industry. So it is something that I will continue to advocate on to make sure that we've got the right policy settings.
Okay. Sounds to me like it's an issue where we've got to balance environmental, but also economic issues here to find the right answer. Is that fair?
Well, as I said, Australia was the only developed economy in the world that didn't have a vehicle emissions standard, which basically meant we became a dumping ground for dirty vehicles for the rest of the world. We are no longer a dumping ground, and there was over a year of consultation that took place and significant debate in Parliament about the vehicle emissions standard.
Okay. Two more questions, then we're done. A simple question. This is well before my time, but someone who remembers back when we were last in Eden Monaro up here in Goulburn, because it's a change for us up here, 1949 to 1983. So I was one when this electorate was when we were last in that electorate. I'm not going to ask that question. The question is, do you plan to maintain an office here in Goulburn, given that in this person's opinion, it was poorly served during the last time that it was part of Eden Monaro?
Yes. Yes, I've opened an office here. We've already had some discussions with the Special Minister of State and Ministerial and Parliamentary Services on keeping an office in Goulburn.
Excellent. That will be of great relief to whoever it was who remembers the last time. Just trying to find the last question I had. Last question from me, and then I'm going to ask Paul to come and wrap up, is this. As Christians, we are commanded to pray for those who are in authority over us and who are given responsibility to govern us. How can we as Christians be praying for you and your party and your colleagues in the coming term?
I think there's no doubt that the world is in a bit of upheaval at the moment with, the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, by what's happening in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza in particular. And, we've always had a stable trading partner in the US, and I think things are in flux in the US. So I think that the best thing we can do as a nation and particularly as Christians is to come together and continue to hope for the peace, stability and good governance of our great nation, and the importance of making sure we back local ideas, local ingenuity and, our local economies in particular.
Thanks. Joe?
Very quickly, it would be on 2 levels. I have people praying for me as a candidate daily because I am on the road a lot, so please pray for my safety. And as I get around the electorate, I think on a broader scale, we need to be praying for governments in terms of making sure that we have good, strong leaders that listen to their communities and that aren't there to serve their own purposes, but to really get out and listen to what you have to say, and making sure that laws are created which are fair, which are just, which have a sense of value, which is how we go to the ballot box. I'd like to think that we don't just rock up and look at someone's corflet and go, oh, she looks good, I'll vote for her today. I feel like maybe a couple do, but that you've invested the time to get to know the candidate, you've gotten to know the party and the values that they espouse and stand for, and the policies that come out of these. So pray for that.
That's wonderful, thank you. Now, I know we've got a lot of questions we didn't get through tonight. Apologies if we didn't get your question. Hopefully there'll be more opportunities in the coming weeks at other forums as well to get some of these questions across to you. Please join me in thanking Kristy and Joe for making time.
Well, thank you for making this a wonderful time. Thank you for showing up and for plugging in all those questions. Let's pray for these 2 wonderful candidates who've been here and given their time to us tonight. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks. We thank you for Kristy, and we thank you for Joe, and we thank you that they have given their time to be with us tonight, to answer questions and to share with us why they wish to serve our electorate and serve our country. We thank you that they are willing to put their hands up to serve, and we pray for them over the next few weeks and months before the election date. We pray you keep them safe as they travel. We pray you keep them well as they go through the rigours of a campaign. And we pray, Heavenly Father, that you would cause this to be an enriching experience for both of them, regardless of whether they win or lose. And we pray, Lord, for a peaceful campaign that is filled with good moments where people get to know each other and can make an informed and prayerful choice. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.